Arizona looks like the kind of place that doesn't hide anything. Wide open sky, flat desert stretching to every horizon. Nowhere to disappear. But that's wrong. Scattered across this state, tucked into canyon rims, buried in mountain passes, sitting right off the highway you've driven 100 times, are places that the maps have quietly stopped showing you. Collapsed buildings with the furniture still inside, jails with the bars still on the windows, entire towns where the streets are still there, the foundations are still there, but every single person is gone. In this video, we are going to visit 12 of them. Some you can walk through today. Some require a four-wheel drive and a willingness to find nothing but silence at the end of the road. Number 6 alone has a history dark enough that most travel guides skip it entirely. And the one waiting at the end of this list started with a railroad and ended with a canyon full of unmarked graves. Let's go find what Arizona doesn't want you to see. Number 12, Swansea, La Paz County. To get to Swansea, you drive 30 miles of Ewan-paved desert road from the nearest town with a gas station. The road climbs and drops through the Buckskin Mountains, the terrain getting rougher the further you commit to it, and somewhere in the middle of all that emptiness, the land opens up and you see it. A collection of brick walls, adobe ruins, and collapsed structures baking under the desert sun. Nobody lives here. Nobody has lived here since 1937, when the mining company that kept it alive finally shut the operation down for good. What the Great Depression started, silence finished. But what remains is remarkable. The brick walls of the old smelter still stand, big, industrial, completely out of place in this landscape, like something that belongs in a steel city and wound up here by mistake. A double row of plastered quarters where the single miners lived still lines what used to be the main drag. Adobe walls of the company officials' homes still hold their shape after almost 90 years of sun and wind. The old railroad depot is still there. Mine shafts drop into the ground, now covered with grates by the Bureau of Land Management, which manages the site today. Walk Swansea and you walk through the skeleton of a community that once had a theater, a saloon, a barbershop, and a moving picture house. People had lives here. They watched films on Friday nights in the middle of the Arizona desert. They went to the barbershop on Saturdays. Then the copper stopped paying, and the lives stopped too. Today, you can camp in the ruins for free. 5 designated sites maintained by the Bureau of Land Management sit right in the middle of the ghost town. Sleep in the desert among the walls of a place the world forgot to tear down. Wake up in the morning to silence and the outline of someone else's past. Gleeson sits about 16 miles east of Tombstone on a dirt road that takes you through some of the loneliest landscape in southeastern Arizona. Most people drive straight past to the more famous towns. Tombstone has the gunfights, the gift shops, the tourists in cowboy hats. Gleeson has none of that. That's exactly why it belongs on this list. What remains of Gleeson is spread across a gentle slope at the foot of the Dragoon Mountains. Adobe and stone structures in various stages of collapse, a rusted ore cart half buried in the earth, mine shafts scattered across the surrounding hills. The old hospital is still standing, its walls cracked and leaning, but the shape of it is recognizable. The schoolhouse ruins are there. And right in the center of it all, the old jail, a solid stone structure built in 1910, was restored and now operates as a small museum, open one Saturday a month. Walk the perimeter of the jail and look through the barred windows at the empty interior. The bars are original. The stone is original. Everything inside is gone, but the structure that held people against their will is still perfectly intact, while the rest of the town falls apart around it. Here is the detail that stays with you. Gleeson's turquoise mine was once considered so exceptional that Tiffany and Company in New York was a regular buyer. The stone pulled from these hills ended up in luxury jewelry stores on Fifth Avenue. Today, the mines are rusted holes in the ground. The people who work them are in a cemetery on the edge of town, their headstones slowly sinking into the desert floor. The gap between what this place produced and what it left behind is hard to stand in front of without feeling something. Walk through Gleeson at dusk, and the Dragoon Mountains turn purple behind the ruins. The jail catches the last light through its barred windows. It is the kind of place where you take a photograph and then stand there a moment longer than you planned to, trying to figure out what exactly you are feeling. Fairbank is one of the more complete ghost towns in Arizona, which means you can actually see what a town looked like, not just where one used to be. The old mercantile is still standing, its adobe walls intact enough to walk through. The post office building is still there. A small schoolhouse that functioned into the 1930s has been restored by the Bureau of Land Management and operates as a museum and visitor center. Walk the marked trails and you pass the ruins of a hotel, the foundation of the old warehouse, and the remains of a saloon. Adobe walls at waist height, doorways that open onto nothing, the geometry of a room still visible without the room. Fairbank was the closest railroad stop to Tombstone during the silver boom. When Tombstone's mines flooded and the silver money stopped, Fairbank had no reason to exist anymore. The last residents left in the 1970s when the remaining buildings were finally condemned as unsafe. But the story that defines Fairbank more than anything else happened in February of 1900. A Wells Fargo guard named Jeff Milton was riding in the express car when 5 outlaws boarded the train at the Fairbank station. Milton killed one of them, but he took a bullet that shattered his arm. Even wounded, he threw the strongbox key into the brush outside before he passed out so the robbers could not access it. Passengers swarmed the bandits and the robbery failed. Told by doctors that his arm had to be amputated, Milton said, "The man who cuts off my arm will be a dead man." They left the arm, he regained partial use of it, and kept working for Wells Fargo for years afterward. The strongbox key was never recovered. It is probably still somewhere in the brush near the old station. Today, the trains still run past Fairbank on the same line. They just do not stop anymore. On a still morning at the station ruins, you can hear them coming from a long way off. Number 9. Ruby in Santa Cruz County. Ruby is in the middle of nowhere by almost any definition. It sits 4 miles from the Mexican border, surrounded by the Coronado National Forest, at the end of a rough dirt road that most vehicles would rather not attempt. Getting here requires intention. You cannot end up in Ruby by accident. What you find when you arrive is one of the most intact ghost towns in the American Southwest. More than 24 buildings are still standing: the jail, the schoolhouse, the company store, the manager's house, miners' quarters, and a warehouse. The structures are in various states of repair, but they are there. The town looks like people left in a hurry and forgot to come back for their things. But what separates Ruby from every other abandoned place on this list is what happened here between 1920 and 1922. 3 separate double murders occurred in and around the town in a 2-year span, 2 of them at the general store and 1 at a mining camp nearby. The victims included store owners and a miner. The killings triggered the largest manhunt in Arizona history at the time, stretching across the border and into Mexico. Nobody ever fully explained why Ruby became a target in that specific period. Its proximity to the border made it vulnerable to people crossing in both directions. Its isolation meant help was hours away at minimum. What happened in those 2 years cast a shadow over Ruby that the subsequent decades of abandonment only deepened. Today, the current owners operate Ruby as a destination for camping, guided tours, and stargazing far from any city light. You can spend a night in one of the most isolated corners of Arizona and hear nothing after dark but your own thoughts and whatever the wind carries up from the canyon. Oatman is technically alive. About 150 people live here, but standing on the main street, watching wild burros wander between the wooden storefronts, you understand immediately why it is on this list. These burros are direct descendants of the pack animals miners left behind when the gold ran out in the 1940s. The mines were declared non-essential to the war effort and shut down on government orders. The miners left in a matter of weeks. The donkeys stayed because nobody came back for them. Their descendants have lived in Oatman ever since, walking the same streets, eating from the hands of tourists, occasionally blocking traffic on Route 66 as if the highway was built for their convenience rather than the other way around. Inside the Oatman Hotel, the walls and ceilings are covered floor to ceiling with signed dollar bills, thousands of them. The tradition started with miners who left emergency cash before heading into the desert, money they might need when they came back broke and needed a meal or a room. Today, visitors continue it, signing bills and stapling them to every available surface. Somewhere under layers of more recent signatures, the original miner money is still there. The wooden buildings on the main street lean into each other in the way old buildings do when they have been in the sun too long, warped and bleached, but still standing. Walk the boardwalks at sunrise before the day trippers arrive, and Oatman feels like a set that the actors abandoned. The burros are the only cast members who showed up. You can see two guns from Interstate 40 if you know what to look for. Just past exit 230, between Winslow and Flagstaff, on the south side of the freeway, a collection of stone ruins sits on the rim of Canyon Diablo. Thousands of people drive past every day. Almost none of them stop, pull off, and walk into it. And the first thing you see is a stone archway with faded letters above it that read, "Mountain Lions." Behind that arch are the ruins of a roadside zoo, stone enclosures where mountain lions, bobcats, and desert animals were kept for travelers to look at in the mid-20th century. The cages are empty now, the stone crumbling at the edges. Tumbleweeds move through the enclosures the animals once paced. The sign still points at something that has not been there for 50 years. There is a graffiti-covered shell of a service station facing the old road. Stone walls of a trading post stand roofless in the desert. A 1915 concrete bridge spans Canyon Diablo below, no longer open to traffic but still structurally sound after more than a century, listed on the National Register of Historic Places and completely ignored by everyone using the modern bridge nearby. The history of Two Guns is dark in a very specific way. The man who built most of it, who ran the zoo, sold tours into the canyon caves, and marketed the site to Route 66 travelers, shot and killed the man whose land he was leasing in a dispute over the operation. He was acquitted and left the state. A fire destroyed most of the remaining buildings in 1971. Interstate 40 bypassed the town and took the traffic with it. Walk the site on a quiet afternoon and you can see all of it. The zoo ruins, the fire-scarred walls, the canyon edge, the bridge. Two Guns feels like a place where a series of bad decisions compounded each other until there was nothing left to make a decision about. Number 6, Jerome, Yavapai County. Jerome is the most dramatic ghost town in Arizona and possibly in the American West because it's a ghost town built on a 50-degree slope, and the slope has been moving since before the town was abandoned. The town clings to Cleopatra Hill above the Verde Valley at 5,000 feet elevation. looking down over one of the most spectacular desert landscapes in the state. From a distance, it looks like something painted onto the mountainside. Up close, it is buildings at severe angles, streets that tilt as you walk them, structures that have been slowly sliding downhill for decades and that have not stopped. The old jail did not just close. It slid 300 feet down the hillside on its own over the course of years and came to rest at the bottom of a slope where no jail was ever supposed to be. It is still down there. You can see it from the road above. It looks like a building that gave up and sat down. At its peak, Jerome had 15,000 residents, and it was one of the largest cities in Arizona. The copper mines beneath the town produced over $1 billion in ore. Then the ore ran out, the copper company left, and the population dropped from 15,000 to less than 100 in the space of a few years. What they left behind was an entire functioning city, mostly intact, on a mountain that would not stop moving. Today, about 500 people live in Jerome, artists, restaurant owners, and gallery keepers who have built something in the ruins of something much larger. The original company buildings are still there. The open pit mine is still visible from Jerome's main street, a massive wound in the mountain that nobody has ever figured out how to address. Walk the upper streets at dusk when the valley below goes orange and the abandoned structures around you shift in the wind. You understand, standing there, that everything built on an unstable foundation eventually shows it. Vulture City is not on the way to anywhere. You take a rough road out of Wickenburg into the Sonoran Desert, saguaros on both sides, nothing moving in the heat, and eventually a cluster of wooden and stone buildings appears, intact enough to walk through, original enough to feel real. The mine this town was built around shut down in 1942 when the government ordered all non-essential gold operations to cease for the duration of the war. The workers were given notice, the equipment was shut down, and Vulture City was abandoned inside of a few weeks. Nobody came back to clear the buildings, nobody came back for the equipment in the yard. The desert just moved in and started working. What you can see today on the self-guided tour, the original assay office where gold was weighed and recorded, the blacksmith shop, tools still present, the cookhouse, the brothel, its purpose is marked on the tour map without euphemism, the jail with original iron bars still in the windows, and in the courtyard, a hanging tree. A mesquite that local records indicate was used to execute at least 18 men convicted of stealing gold from the mine operation. The tree is still alive. It still stands in the same courtyard. Whatever happened beneath its branches, it absorbed and continued growing. Walk through in the afternoon when the shadows are long and the heat has pulled the moisture out of everything. The rusting vehicles from the last days of operation are still in the yard. Trucks and equipment from the 1940s, the decade the mine closed, sitting exactly where they stopped. Nobody came back to move them. There was nothing to move them for. Courtland had 2,000 people in 1909. By 1921, the copper ran out and the town was over. 12 years. That's all Courtland got. What's left today is a concrete jail that still stands in the middle of an empty field, adobe walls at knee height where buildings used to be, and the detail that nobody forgets once they see it, a full concrete sidewalk running down what was the main street. A real sidewalk poured for a town that was expected to last. Nobody built it for ruins. They built it because they expected to be walking on it for generations. The sidewalk goes nowhere now. It connects nothing to nothing. Brush grows up through the cracks, but the concrete itself is still there, still following the line of a street that exists now only as an absence in the landscape. Drive through Courtland, and the silence is the loudest thing about it. No visitor center, no guided tours, No organized restoration effort, just the concrete jail, the ghost of a sidewalk, and the desert working at its own pace. Courtland was part of a cluster of mining towns in this corner of Cochise County, Gleeson nearby, Pierce not far, Tombstone beyond. All of them born from the same boom, most of them dead before 1940. Stand on that sidewalk and look down the line. You can see the outline of foundation walls in the brush on both sides. The town is gone, but the footprint is still there, pressed into the earth. That's somehow more unsettling than complete erasure. The shape of a life without the life in it. Number 3, Charleston, Cochise County. Charleston does not get talked about much because it is mostly gone. A few adobe ruins sit in the San Pedro River Valley, some scattered foundations, and a cemetery holding people who did not expect to be forgotten. But in the early 1880s, Charleston was one of the most important industrial towns in Arizona. Silver ore from Tombstone's mines was hauled by wagon to the mills along the San Pedro River. Charleston's whole reason for being was processing what Tombstone pulled out of the ground. The two towns were economically the same organism. When Tombstone's mines flooded in 1886 and the silver money stopped, Charleston lost its function overnight. By 1889, it was empty. The mills went quiet, the workers left, and the river kept flowing past the ruins without any particular concern. What Charleston had that Tombstone did not was a reputation for being lawless, even by the standards of that era. Outlaw Frank Stillwell used it as a base of operations for years. The town attracted people who found Tombstone itself too regulated. Violence here was routine and mostly unrecorded. Walk the site today, and the San Pedro River is still right there, just as it was when the mills ran. The water that powered the industry is present. The industry is not. A few adobe walls rise from the grass. The river does not care. It carried the same water past the same banks before Charleston existed, and it will carry it long after the last wall falls. Number 2, Swansea's neighbor, the Humboldt Smelter in Yavapai County. The Humboldt Smelter is one of those Arizona places that sits in plain sight and goes entirely unnoticed because there is no sign pointing to it and no parking lot encouraging you to stop. From the road, you see a massive brick smokestack rising from the desert floor with nothing around it, no buildings, and no visible infrastructure. Just the lone stack standing alone like a giant's finger pointing at the sky. The smelter complex processed ore from the mines of central Arizona through the first half of the 20th century. It was one of the largest operations of its kind in the state. When the ore supply was finally exhausted and the operation shut down in 1950, the company stripped the site of what it could move and sold the salvage rights to everything else. The buildings were dismantled for materials. The equipment was broken down and sold for scrap. The smokestack was too expensive and too dangerous to demolish, so they simply left it. It is still there. One stack from an 1899 installation was toppled in 1955, and school was let out that day so the children could watch it fall. That memory can be wonderful, or it can be haunting, depending on your perspective. Drive past it on the highway and you will wonder what it belongs to. There is no building next to it and no context, just the stack, the desert, and the sky. A monument to an industry that extracted everything it needed and left exactly one thing it could not. Number 1, Canyon Diablo, Coconino County. Here's the one that requires the most explanation. And here's the one where the explanation doesn't quite cover it. Canyon Diablo sits 3 miles north of Two Guns, at the point where the Santa Fe Railway crossed the canyon in 1880. A settlement grew around the construction camp while the rail trestle was being built. Workers, gamblers, outlaws, and the people who serviced all of them poured onto the canyon rim and built something that wasn't really a town. It was more like a violent, temporary arrangement. Canyon Diablo lasted less than a year as a functioning settlement. In that time, investigators later estimated it produced a violent death approximately every day. There was no law. The town's first marshal was shot and killed on his first day of duty. His replacement lasted somewhat longer. A third candidate declined the position. For months, nobody was willing to take the job of keeping order in a place where order had never been the point. When the railroad trestle was finished and the construction crews moved on, Canyon Diablo emptied almost overnight. What they left behind, the bones of buildings, the wreckage of a place built entirely around temporary need, baked in the Arizona sun for the rest of the century and into this one. Today, the site is accessible, but there is almost nothing standing above ground. The desert has taken back most of it, the way the desert eventually takes everything. But the canyon itself is still there. That deep red gash in the Coconino Plateau, 300 feet deep, the walls stain the color of dried blood by iron oxide in the stone. The 1880 trestle footings are visible at the canyon edge if you look for them. And the cemetery, if you find it, and it takes looking, holds the men who died during Canyon Diablo's brief and savage existence. There are no headstones for most of them. The records weren't kept carefully enough to tell you who they were or how they got there. Stand at the rim of Canyon Diablo on a still afternoon. Interstate 40 runs 3 miles to the south. You can hear it as a low, continuous presence, the sound of the modern world moving freight between cities. But at the canyon edge, there is none of that. The red walls drop away below you. The wind moves through the juniper. The only sign of the settlement that was here is the absence of anything where something should be. Somewhere below the surface of this ground are the remains of people who came here for work or opportunity, or to escape something else and ended up staying permanently. No markers. No documentation of who they were, just the canyon, the same as it was before they came, the same as it will be after every trace of their presence is finally gone. 12 places, some still open to visitors, some requiring a serious four-wheel drive vehicle, some accessible only if you know exactly where to look. Arizona has over 400 ghost towns on record, which means there are hundreds more sitting in the desert that nobody has documented, mapped, or acknowledged yet. The next time you drive Interstate 40 between Flagstaff and Winslow, look south at exit 230. You will see the stone ruins on the canyon rim. You will know what you are looking at now, and 3 miles to the north, beyond what you can see from the road, there is a canyon with unmarked graves, no explanatory sign, and no reason to stop.